how are you guys today? We want to welcome you to our Behind the Bastards podcast. In this podcast, we take you back to 1929 when the Great Depression started. Rena, tell us about our podcast.
This podcast takes you back to the past and tells you guys about what happened in the past that affects the world, US today. In today's topic, Theodore, Andrew, and Rena Isaac are going to take you guys on an adventure to the Great Depression's era. The Great Depression for sure changed the US today. Theodore, what made the Great Depression happen?
The background of how it started is that the US market started running low on supplies and employees were quitting their jobs. Can you tell us about the beginning of the Great Depression?
When the Great Depression began, the United States was the only industrialized country in the world without some form of unemployment insurance or social security. This means to keep jobless people from suffering and force them to dissolve their asses to afford food, rent, and other necessities. This way, it helped people go through the Great Depression by having food and rent. During this Great Depression, very few people had jobs and over 12 million didn't. In 1935, Congress passed the Social Security, which for the first time provided Americans with unemployment, disability, and pensions for old age.
Rena, can you go back and tell us about what this topic's about?
Just to restate what we're going to be talking about, we're going to talk about how the Great Depression started back in 1929. This day, referred as Black Thursday, saw an unmatched 12.9 million shares traded. In 1930, there was a wave of bank failures, and as the Dust Bowl on the Great Plains led to more farm foreclosures, unemployment reached over 2% by 1933 in the spring and fall of 1931. As well as the fall of 1932, the United States experienced a wave of bank runs leading to the closure of thousands of banks by early 1933. Most markets were starting to get scared and overpriced their supplies. Theodore, what do you think about the Great Depression?
I think the Great Depression was the worst economic crisis in history and was triggered by a decline in consumer demand. Rising consumer debt, reduced industrial output, and the rapid and irresponsible growth of the U.S. stock market. A U.S. stock market is where a group of sellers and buyers get together to trade their shares for other things they want from other sellers or buyers, known as share ownership. It caused a crisis in the global economy, which was connected through the gold standard.
I have a question. How did the investigators feel about the crisis?
The anxious investors start to sell off their overvalued stock in large quantities, leading to the long-anticipated stock market crash. The Federal Reserve's decision to raise its requirements for money in reserve contributed to the severe recession that struck in 1937. Even though the economy started to improve once more in 1938, the impact of the Great Depression persisted until the end of the decade due to this second severe recession, which undid much of the gains in unemployment and production.
Can you explain about when the war broke out in Europe?
When war broke out in Europe in 1939 as a result of German aggression, the Works Progress Administration focused on expanding the U.S. military established while maintaining the U.S. neutrality. The war would ultimately see the end of the Great Depression as production expanded dramatically and millions were needed for war in the workforce. Can you summarize the whole story?
To summarize the whole concept of what we were talking about, the Great Depression was a critical moment because everything suddenly dropped towards where every country needed supplies in markets and any other public stores. The Great Depression spread throughout the world. Businesses were failing because of the unemployment of the Great Depression. The Great Depression spread across the whole world, making families starve. What would happen if the Great Depression never happened?
If the Great Depression never happened, the US would have a stronger economy with many people getting jobs. There wouldn't be any social security. Thanks for listening. If you're interested in this episode, go ahead and subscribe to Behind the Bastard for more facts about history. Later, people. Keep checking our YouTube platform for more historical information to understand the whole world today.